Okay, well, welcome back to the Wealth Accelerator, where we help you achieve financial freedom through real estate investing. I am so excited. I've got Amanda Rem Ryan here today, special guest with Rem Ryan Property Tax Advisors. Amanda, welcome.
Hey, Matt, thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
Awesome, awesome. Well, excited to have you on. I know how long have we been working together now? I think it's been 5 years.
Uh, 3 or 5. I can't remember.
Three
No,
or
yeah,
five.
because we met. It's probably, yeah, 3 to 5.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's been fun to get to know you over the past few years and seeing what you're doing with clients, from a property tax perspective. And this is a very niche part of this asset type to where we're going to be able to dive in to taxes, how you can save on taxes, and you are the expert. So I'm excited to pick your brain and be able to give value to our listeners, based on your feedback. So let's dive in. And starting out, I would just love to hear more about your story about how you got into real estate, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I fell into it. Anybody that you talk to that's in property tax fell into it. There are a couple of people who, their parents were in it and they grew up in property tax, but I have yet to meet somebody who said, "Oh, when I grow up, I want to be a property tax consultant." I was in college and I needed a job and I didn't want to work retail, so I got this internship at a real estate company, and I started, I was doing data entry stuff. And then by the end of the summer, I was doing residential property tax hearings. Didn't know what property taxes were. I mean, it's kind of crazy when I think back on it. Did that for a couple of summers. And then my initial plan was to go to law school. Well, this company had made me an offer, and I'm like, well, I can go make like a lot of money, or I can go put myself in a lot of debt. So that's how I got into commercial real estate. Um, Fast forward to today, it's really become a lot of fun. I really, really love working with clients. I love developing strategies to lower their tax liabilities. Your property taxes, when you look at an operating statement, that's going to be the biggest line item on there. So anything that you can do to minimize that burden and even the increases year over year is something that any prudent operator is going to want to do.
Gotcha. Well, actually, while we're on that topic, before I get to the next one, when you look at operating expenses for an industrial building or a commercial building, do you generally know how much of that is operating expenses are taxes, like percentage of that, like 40%, 50%? I mean, what do you typically see?
I actually don't know that because you have to take the taxes out when you're valuing it from income. So I would have to look at one, but
Okay.
I
Yeah,
can
yeah, I was
get
just kind of curious to know if you typically see a certain percentage of the full, operating expenses, because I know you've got taxes, insurance,
right.
CAM,
Yep.
all that stuff. And I know when I've looked at it, I mean, you're right, taxes are a massive portion of that. So, well, okay. So I know we met up for coffee recently, and you said, "Hey, man, I'm really excited. I have just started a new venture, moving away from what you were just doing and started your own company." So tell us a little bit about that. Why did you jump into your own new thing now?
Yeah, when I was 25, a mentor said, "If you ever get the opportunity to run your own company, you need to do it." And I was 25 at the time, and I'm like, "Well, that's not gonna happen today." Here we are just a few years later from 25. I have had the joy of working for some really incredible companies, and I've learned a lot and I've met a lot of great clients. And I got to this point where I was tired of sitting on all of these revenue calls. It, we weren't, we were no longer talking about the clients and how we can better serve them, or, what problems are they having that we can solve. It wasn't about them. It was like, how much are you invoicing
How
and
much
how much are you going
can
to
we
have
make
by the end of
money?
the year? Yeah. And I'm like, eh, I'm a firm believer that if you do right by the clients, for the most part, the money's going to come. If you're working with sound business people on the other end, then the money's going to come. And I think that's just been lost with a lot. I'm not going to speak outside of the property tax world, but it's happened a lot where we've lost sight of who we're doing this for and why we're doing it. We're doing it so that we can minimize tax burdens for our clients, so that they have more capital to go out and buy more land and grow. And it just I got tired of those revenue calls, and I got to a point where my company was being acquired, so I was at a fork in the road, and I'm like, "Well, you know what? Let's do it. I know I can do it. I know I can build something that's centered around clients that really focuses on their needs and making their lives easier." So here we are, 12 months later, or 12 months into it.
I love it. That's so awesome. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it too, even in my personal experience with others. I mean, as companies get larger and grow, it kind of becomes less about the client and more about, you know, sales and increasing sales by 10 or 20%. And it's like, hey, we want to do that. Great. But I mean, we, money is a result of service. And
Right.
so we can't forget about the service.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm not naive. I mean, obviously, income has to be greater than expenses to run a business. I mean, that isn't lost on me, but the weekly and monthly calls that just focus on, "Well, what are you doing today? I don't care what you did yesterday. We need to get more in the door." And it's like, how about I just go service my clients and make their lives easier, and we don't talk about this, and I promise the revenue will come. And that never flew with my bosses.
Yeah, no, I get it. I see it all the time. But it does sound like since you've now launched your new venture, 12 months ago, you have had clients even come with you. So, you have, because of your service and how well you take care of your clients, it feels like to me from what you've said, the clients don't really care about the brand. They care about Amanda and they care about who you are because you are the brand and you're the one that's taking care of their needs. So, can you tell us a little bit about who some of those clients are? You don't have to list names, but what does the typical client look like that you serve right now?
So I primarily serve the Texas region. Every property tax law and processes and rates and ratios, they vary state by state. So I decided to just focus in my own backyard, Texas. And my typical client's going to be owners and operators of commercial real estate, whether that be distribution, industrial properties, multifamily, retail centers, office buildings. Typically, the people who are, and I don't work for a ton of management companies. Usually, it's the owner that is going out and picking who they want to represent their properties, which is also kind of cool because you're talking directly to the source. Yeah, they know what's going on. That they, or your contact person works for that company, so they know what the pain points are. So that's really neat. But yeah, owners, operators of commercial real estate.
Gotcha. So, I've done a lot of commercial real estate deals and working with owners. And I guess I would be curious to know out of these owners that you talk to, do you see many people actually protesting taxes? Like, because I know some owners I work with, they don't even think about it. They're like, yeah, I don't know, maybe. But then some are very focused on it and say, you know what, I want to save taxes or I want to save costs wherever I can. I mean, do you see a big opportunity out there based on, what you're doing with other clients?
Yeah, if I mean, I tell everybody, even my friends that live down the street that just own their homestead, I tell everybody to protest every year. When you protest, there isn't the possibility of it going up. The worst case scenario is it stays the same. And if you protest every year, then you're being diligent on staying on top of those value increases. So, I in my world, I'm like, okay, everybody who owns real estate in Texas, they protest. I found out last year that one of my girlfriends has lived here for 5 years and they never protested the taxes on their house, and I almost fell out of my chair. So, to your point, there are people that, I mean, she moved from Seattle, so that just wasn't a thing there. So, yeah, I mean, I guess there are people out there who just don't really pay attention to it, but I highly recommend it.
And I guess your services are based on really you're compensated as a small percentage of the success that you negotiate on behalf of so it's kind of a no-brainer for the client because worst case scenario, it says the same. Best case scenario, they get to save a lot on taxes
Right.
and you're compensated as a small percentage of that,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Yeah, there's no upfront out-of-pocket costs. So if I don't save you any money, then you don't pay me any money. So it really is a win-win.
So yeah, it's a massive win-win. So if people aren't protesting taxes, they need to, and they should
Yes.
call you
Yeah.
to make it happen. And it sounds like you're mostly doing industrial real estate, but maybe a little bit multifamily and retail too. Do you do any office or are those kind
You
of the
know,
buildings you're handling?
I have not picked up any office clients. I would love to. Um, I was very fortunate and blessed to bring over some of my former clients. So this first year, I wanted to focus solely on them and make sure everything was in place and running smooth. So now I'm getting out there and setting up meetings and things like that. But yeah, warehouses and multifamily, I guess, were my focus. And then retail and office were just kind of a small percentage of what I have done. But I mean, honestly, Matt, anything with an income statement is an income statement. So there are plenty of property types out there that I would say, no, I would be doing you a huge disservice if I signed you up as a client. But let me refer you to some of my colleagues that can do this. But if it's got an income statement, I can do it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So let's do a little role play. And I gave you this address prior just for us to kind of, talk today. So there's a property on Fondren near the Galleria. One of my clients owns that property. I think it's close to 18 to 20,000 square feet, larger kind of retail building. Now, if I were to go to her and say, hey, have you protested taxes? Have you not? Would you consider it? You know, what were you able to find as potential opportunity with that building just based on the, light due diligence you did?
Okay, yeah, sure. So, I mentioned to you, I without having access to the counties, their complete evidence, it's hard to see the whole picture. But on this one, just looking at it and also looking at CoStar, I went and first I looked at the land. Their land is on for $35 a square foot. Now it stayed the same from last year. It didn't increase. So that creates a challenge because, well, one, let me say Harris County does not like to reduce land. It makes it even harder if the land stayed flat. But I looked and there were tracks surrounding the property that were lower. Some were at 35 but have been adjusted downward. So maybe this track can get a negative adjustment down for the size. The shape is a little, I mean, the shape is fine, but we could argue that it's not, a perfect square or perfect rectangle. So I would say we need to go to 25 or $30 a square foot on the dirt. And then looking at the improvements, they went up. They went from about 1.2 million to 1,460,000. And I'm sure the county, when I say it's hard to know the whole picture, because I'm sure the county does have historical sales for restaurants that they would use to justify that increase. But when I went on CoStar and I looked for restaurants in this area, there wasn't anything comparable. I think there were 2 sales, and they were significantly newer. This one was built in the 70s, and these 2 sales comps were built in the 2000s. So not comparable by any means. So just looking at the lack of sales, I would go in and say, hey, our improved value needs to be the prior year, because you have to have market data to support an increase in value. And I would argue that they don't have that.
And what he's probably doing is taking some of those newer comps and trying to justify a higher, but you, because you're the expert in it, you know the difference between it and you can try to sparse them apart. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So looking at the dirt and the improvements, their current value for 24 is just under 4.9. I would have argued something between 4 million, 4,150,000, which comes out to between, I'll call it 14 and 17,000 in tax savings for 2024.
Nice.
And there could be more in there, more in the county's evidence. Their sales could support something significantly lower, but, just looking at it kind of from a 30-foot view level, I'd say, yeah, there's definitely opportunity there.
So average kind of cost savings, potential cost savings is 14 to 17,000 bucks that
Mhm.
they could achieve potentially.
Yep.
And then, so your fee on that, if you were to go negotiate that, get those savings, are you like 30% of that fee or like how do you typically structure that?
Yeah, it's a sliding scale. So, I mean, if somebody comes in, they have this massive portfolio, there's going to be discounts for that. Um, but usually closer to the 30% on just single one-off assets.
Okay. So now now I'll say I told my client, "Hey, that's amazing. We can go save 15 grand, on this," which is, I mean, it's not like life changing, but it's $50,000, still money. So say I went and told her, Hey, let's work with Amanda on this." What would that process look like, and when could those savings actually occur?
So the deadline to protest taxes is in May of each year. If we could prove that this value was significantly overvalued, there's a correction motion that we could do in January, but I don't know if we would be able to meet that threshold just based off of these numbers. So it would probably be 2025. So we would sign a contract. She would sign, it's called an appointment of agent form that just gives me the authority to go to the county on her behalf. Notice values come out March, April of every year. So we'd get the notice values. I would protest in May, and then I'll get scheduled for a hearing. And it's my job to get all the evidence together, do all the digging. I go down to the county and I argue for a lower value. From that point, if we want, we can do one of, well, I guess, three things. We could say, "Oh, this value is great. We love it," and we're done. If we're not happy with the value, we can do arbitration or file a lawsuit to continue the fight down the road.
And I think you told me arbitration really doesn't happen that often, does it? Or, I mean, does it happen more than we think?
Oh, no, it happens a lot. I just
Really? Okay.
personally, yeah, all my, a lot of my friends are like, "Oh, yeah, we file hundreds of these every year," and I'm like, "Man, I need to jump on the bandwagon." But no, I have heard very good stories from arbitration. It's, from what I understand, there's a very high success rate. And it's a lot more affordable. So under I think so it's the cap is 5,000,000. If your property is over $5,000,000, you cannot arbitrate it. But the fee, and I hope I'm not lying to you, it's like 1,500 or $2,000. And if you win, you get everything back except for the $50 filing fee. So if you win, it's cost you 50 bucks.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, and you said that's for anything 5,000,000 and less,
Mhm.
there's opportunity for arbitration,
Yep.
but not over $5,000,000 valuation. So why is that?
So they did this and then the circuit breaker that I was telling you about to make it more affordable for the homeowners and also the mom and pop businesses. So if you've got, you know, somebody that's trying to make a living for their family, they're running this, business and the taxes are killing them. They can't, it's not cost beneficial to file a lawsuit because a lawsuit costs, $3 to $5,000. So their taxes just keep increasing and increasing. So this was a way to make those avenues more affordable for people doing, the business owners here locally and the homeowners.
Gotcha. Okay. So that's really the tax piece of this, really advocating for them. And it sounds like it's a very cyclical thing. At a certain time of year, you've got to do certain things. Do you offer any other consulting services kind of throughout the year? Or is that kind of like the main bread and butter that you're working on for clients?
Yeah, I mean, so that is the, good chunk of what I do, but I mean, really anything related to property taxes. So, I do a lot of pre-acquisition due diligence for clients. I do a lot of their budgeting. Whenever their annual budgets come in, I give them the property tax piece of that budget, chasing down refund checks. But the pre-acquisition and the budgets are a big thing that clients really appreciate.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, this may be giving away the secret sauce. I don't know. But I know for me, as a broker, comps are such a big deal in almost anything you do because that creates leverage, that creates a baseline understanding of your strategies and negotiations, all that. Are you able to tell us where you get comps?
So I actually
Or your
get
secret sauce?
yeah. The county actually provides so again, they have to have market data to substantiate increases. So they actually provide you their market data whenever you protest, so you can get it there, and then CoStar, whatever I can find on CoStar.
And then do you work with any brokers too to try to get, some other land comps or because I know I've heard, CoStar, there's some really good data and then sometimes the data may not be as good, which honestly could be for your benefit or not, depending on the situation. Do you work with any brokers out there or other people to try to source comps based on their local databases?
I've been thinking about that, and I'm actually gonna start picking your brain.
Read my brain on? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
like, I mean, I know it's funny, because the MLS for residential, I mean, that's where everything goes, but in commercial real estate, it's still the Wild West, especially in Texas, or I mean, most places, because we don't have a centralized MLS for all the comps that are getting done, and so it's, Stream or JLL, these groups out there like, "Hey, I've got my comps, you got yours." We kinda share them in exchange for other things, and it's
yeah,
like it's a bartering thing trying to get comps out there, where CoStar is trying to aggregate it all
yeah.
together, so but yeah, I mean, I would say CoStar is probably the best too, at least for now.
I will say if you are, entering into, if you're gonna purchase any property, well, I guess not residential, but, if you are able to keep that purchase price confidential and especially off the deed, that's helpful. That kinda slows the whenever the reassessment based off of that purchase price is, postponed slightly if you're able to keep that purchase price confidential.
Because Texas is a non-disclosure
Mhm.
state.
Yep.
Yes, essentially, if a cash buyer buys it, then really nothing's on there unless they just wanna give the state the information, right?
Right. Yeah, and you can put $10 on the deed, so you don't have to put the actual purchase price. Um, so that's my advice. I mean, at the end of the day, the county is going to get that purchase price. They have ways of getting that data, but if you can slow that process a little bit, then that's always helpful.
So let me ask you this, say someone buys a $10 million piece of property, they go out and get a loan on it, a deed of trust for 70% value of that. They put 30% equity in. So now the 70% is $7 million deed of trust. That's recorded with the state, right?
Yeah.
So then the state knows, oh, okay, well, there's a $7 million loan. I wonder,
Yeah. Yeah.
I bet the purchase price was probably 9 or $10 million, something like that.
Yeah.
You think that happens often?
It does, yeah. Yeah, I've had loan amounts used against me in hearings before. Um, yep.
And do you know, like, do they have again, when I'm talking about the equity piece, they're just trying to estimate what that is because they don't know. Do you think they're thinking like 30% equity, 40% equity in the property? I mean, is there a certain amount that you've seen in some of these hearings?
It's, between 20 and 30 is what
I mean,
I've
30.
seen it, yeah, assessors assume as the amount.
Interesting. Yeah, I know. I've always seen the deeds of trust out there. And even when I'm going to buy buildings for clients, and we're negotiating. I'm like, "Well, I know they've got $8 million debt on the property that they
Yeah,
put on the property 2 years ago, so they probably owe, you know, 7 million or at
yeah,
least." And so I just know generally where it is, so it
yeah,
helps negotiations.
yeah.
Okay. Well, a few more questions, and then we can wrap this up. I wanted to ask you, so different case studies that you've had for clients, has there been some, interesting or cool case studies that you've had or success stories that, you think would be valuable to share?
Yeah, so I did some thinking on that, and a lot of my really cool ones are from my former employer. So, I chose to keep those, out of the mix. What I will say is, for people who are investing, they need to be diligent with what their property taxes are, and if they're outside of Texas, being mindful of what that state does to get their funding. If it's, state income tax, is it sales tax, is it property tax? Because property taxes you can't appeal. One thing I wanted to talk about is, at least within Texas and Harris County specifically, a lot of their valuations are based off of how they classify the property. So if you go in there and you buy something and it's coded as like a class C, and then 2 years later, they make it a class B, as in boy, where your taxes are gonna go up 20, 30% just based off of that one change. So, for anyone who's investing in real estate, they need to be very diligent and mindful of what the tax situation is. And then also, if you're doing new construction, The county will allow for up to 3 years for lease up, but once that property's stabilized, they're gonna, and this is where having a savvy tax consultant helps. They're gonna want to put like a 20 to 30% increase on that, coming from what it costs to construct to now that it's stabilized. So, being mindful of how your specific jurisdiction handles property taxes, how aggressive they are, and then just staying on top of it.
Yeah. So I know when I go to CoStar or other places and I see buildings classified as Class A or, Class A trophy buildings or Class B or Class C, does that oftentimes come from the state of, them classifying that building as a Class C or Class B building? Or do you know how some of those classifications actually happen?
Yeah, so I think the CoStar ratings are CoStar driven because they don't. I mean, if you're looking at a Class A plus 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 building, then obviously it's going to be similar. But when you get down into like the B's and C's, what CoStar considers a Class C, the county may say, "Oh no, well this is a B. It's almost an A." So I do think that those CoStar ratings are driven by CoStar analysts.
Gotcha.
'Cause yeah, like I said, unless it's like just the complete dog of a property or a trophy of a property, there's usually a lot of, discrepancies between the jurisdiction and CoStar.
Gotcha, but you're saying the city at least has its own classification of assets, and they do class A, B, and C. Do they do anything beyond that, or is that kind of the 3 tiers that they can
Well, locally here in Houston, it's, A through D as in dog.
A through D?
Yeah, and then there's a whole other set for if it's not income producing. There's a whole other classification set there, and that's actually interesting. So that is something that I've had. I don't want to say fun with, but those classes is how Harris County will value properties, and they get those classes based off of the rents. Well, I have several properties where the rents don't justify that high of a classification, and the county doesn't wanna change it, and I'm like, "Well, for, these 200 properties over here, you're saying it's driven by rents, but for these 5, it's a no-go?" So, stay tuned on that. That's been an interesting journey trying to navigate that piece of it.
Oh, interesting. So say an industrial building is quoting 70 cents a square foot per month, triple net, and they're trying to classify it as, like, class A building when all the comps are at $1.10. You would go to them and say, "Hey, look, there's these 100 comps at $1.10 and these 5 at whatever, like, hey, you're artificially pushing us up into this new asset class when really," and then they're trying to justify like a 20 to 30% increase on that.
Yep. Yeah,
Damn.
because 'cause they'll say, "Oh, well, it's based off of the construction and the quality." I'm like, "Well, you have this 30-year-old building over here that you still have classified as an A. It's kinda turning it into a dog. Like, why don't you drop that one down? You're saying this one's brand new, and that's why it's higher." So, they talk out of both ends. So
Yeah, I
we'll
wonder if
see what
it's because,
happens.
in Houston with no zoning, I mean, you got random stuff all over the place. And it's probably like a Class C or Class D building here, and then all this new construction kind of around it, and they're pulling in all these comps, but
Yep.
this has been around for 50 years or longer.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yeah,
mean, at the end of the day, that's why it's like, hey, no brainer, hire a consultant, a tax
yeah,
rate. The
yeah,
city wants money. Obviously, the government always wants more money. And so they're going to do everything they can to increase the values. And if no one's going to protest it or contest it,
yep.
why
They're gonna
not?
do it. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it seems like a no brainer that most cases you could probably save some, if not a lot, by trying. And the good thing is, if we hire you, I don't have to spend all the time and energy to do it. I can let you just go do it. You receive, a certain percentage of it, and we just move on, and everyone's happy.
Yep. Yeah, you gotta send you some documents, and that's about it. Try to make it as painless as possible.
Well, that sounds like a win. Well, I've got a lot of clients that I will probably send your way,
Alright.
and, it'd be fun to maybe have you on another podcast in the future, maybe talk about some of those results. Maybe this Lane property or, the Fondren property we were talking about would be fun to
Yeah,
get you
that
engaged
would be fun.
see how it goes, and then have you back on another podcast and say, hey, remember that? What do those results look like? And, what did that
Yeah.
process look like in real time?
Yeah, no, I would love that. That would be a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, one more question before we go. I guess what would be the biggest piece of advice? And you kind of touched on this earlier, but what would be biggest piece of advice you would recommend to our listeners today? Again, it's individual investors, but sometimes investors that are part of these institutions. Anything you would give them based on your, expert knowledge?
Yeah, so, yeah, I did mention this before, just being mindful of how property taxes are handled in your specific state wherever you are investing, and if it's, like Texas, we don't have a state income tax, so obviously our property taxes are significantly higher than states that do have a state income tax. So just being mindful of what jurisdictions you're looking to buy in, and then also for anyone who owns property, I recommend hiring somebody. If it's just your homestead, I say, if you got the time, go and do it. But especially if you're busy and this isn't your homestead, hire somebody and let the experts go down there and fight for you. That way you don't have to worry about it.
I love it. Awesome. Well, Amanda, how can people reach out to you and get a hold of you if they want to touch base?
Yeah, so my email is acrumrine. It's ACRUMRINE at Crumrine PTA. That's CRUMRINE PTA.com.
Awesome. And I'll try to drop that in the link below as well. And that way people can get a hold of you easier too. But well, thank you for coming on. Hopefully we can have you again in the future. And I appreciate all the advice you gave today.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.